This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. Tully Models is hitting the road. Come see their growing line of industry and mill modeling details from Industrial Modeler Supply and Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply, July 19th and 20th at the National Train Show at the 2025 NMRA National Convention in Novi, Michigan. Then it's off to the St. Louis RPM, July 24th through 26th at the Gateway Center in Collinsville, Illinois. Stop by and find out how Tully Models can take your layout industries to the next level. For more, check out their website at tullymodels.com. You could win a $200 gift certificate to Spring Creek Model Trains just by taking our survey. Head over to aroundthelayout.com/survey to give us your feedback and enter for your chance to win. The survey and contest ends on June 27th at 5 p.m. Eastern, so don't delay. Again, it's aroundthelayout.com/survey. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. On this episode, we're going to be talking to a guy whose mind is only narrow because of the gauge. Coming to us from New South Wales, Australia, Steve Pettit. Steve, welcome to the show.
How you going, Ray? Good to be here.
Glad to have you here. You sent me some amazing notes, and I've been reading through this biography of yours, and I guess I got to start right off with the very first question. Where does all this diversity come from? Because you have done some pretty amazing things within a bunch of different scales. Where does that all come from?
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer, Ray, but I think as you do something in the hobby or you sort of tick a box or achieve something, especially in the last, say, 15, 20 years, I've kind of thought, well, what next? A lot of the time, I enjoy building layouts, enjoy modeling, especially the artistic side, the weathering and the detailing. And I guess I'm kind of, in some respects, looking for that next challenge. And some things worked out and some didn't. And at the end of the day, it was probably more of a practical experiment to see, does this work? And if it does, I still try to use some of those techniques today, So that's probably the best way I can answer that, Ray.
Well, I tell you, it's really amazing. And you have done some experimentation and experimenting in different scales. How many different scales have you modeled in?
Well, pretty much everything but the Z scale. I think. Yeah. No, look, when I was young, I had some N scale, and that was back when it was either N scale locos were either stop or go, really fast. So NHO, HON3, bit of HON30, some ON3 and ON30. And about just before COVID hit, I was tinkering around with some GN15. So that's G scale, 1 to 24 scale on HO gauge tracks of 16.5 mil. So it's a funky sort of a thing. And I'd played around with it for a few years and put a small layout together, which was an abbreviated version of what I'd originally planned. But working in larger scales teaches you a few techniques. Not all of those translate to smaller scales. I'm predominantly just working in HO these days and have for the last 10 to 15 years. But I think it also gives you appreciation of, what other people are doing in the hobby. And I really, a lot of people will bag out N scale, for example. And I think that's unfair because N scale lends itself to creating some really good realistic scenery that dominates the trains. And I think it's worth getting appreciation for that, if you know what I mean. And my eyesight's not what it was 20 years ago, but I do, and you see some fine modelling in N-scale now that it would be hard to pick and differentiate between HO, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean, N-scale has certainly come a long way, and especially in the last oh boy, at least 10 or 15 years. And it has become amazing, not only for its reliability, but the detail that they're able to do now in scale is just incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've diversified in all these different scales. Where did this all start?
Well, I guess when I was a youngster, I try to sort of think back. I think I was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old. And when I was young, I had a lot of Lego. And predominantly, I had most of that sort of was related to a Lego train that I had and built and expanded that. And this was back in the early 70s. So there wasn't that much available. But what there was I really enjoyed it. And then my folks, I said, oh, I really would like to get, a model railroad going. And they was like, oh, so I got over a couple of Christmases, and then I was given some Tyco and some Hornby trains at the time. And back in the day, that was pretty much, it was all available to any kids or even anyone older who wanted to get into the hobby. The Tyco didn't look or run really well, but it was like the trains that I recognised in Trains and Model Railroad magazine. The Hornby stuff I just didn't relate to because it looked very, very posh, very British, and that's fine. But I kind of left that in the boxes and gravitated towards the American prototype stuff. And I remember at the time I was in, we call it infants or primary school. My school librarian, Mrs. Salisbury, she actually saw me reading one of the Model Railroad magazines, and it was probably a Malcolm Furlow cover or John Olson or one of those guys who I just look at those photos for days on end. And she said, "Oh, Steve, you in it?" I said, "Yeah, I'm sorry." So she said, "Look," and she was a really lovely lady, and she organised monthly subscriptions to Model Railroad and Trains magazine just for me, and she'd set them aside. and I was like, wow. So if you sort of and that back in those days, yes, you could get the magazines from the newsagent probably about 3 months after publication. But so I had my favourite part of going to school was getting my Model Railroaders from the library. So that's, I guess, probably, Ray, is where I sort of got interested in trains. And we have a good railway network here in Australia, but I just never, I don't know, I never got inspired by those trains. Back in those days, everything was like a Tuscan red. It was very uniform, but I always sort of gravitated towards the US prototypes and predominantly Western USA. Was lucky enough to go there once as a kid, and then I've been back many times since. Then when I got into the hobby, HO was a good scale. Well, it was pretty much the only scale that was available. There's a little bit of N scale coming out of Japan and some of the really rough earlier stuff. But I thought, well, and I really was influenced and really enjoyed the stuff that John Olson did, the Jerome and Southwestern, obviously Malcolm Furlow's stuff. He actually came out here, the Model Railway Club at Western Sydney, arranged to bring Malcolm Furlow out for a convention. And I think Malcolm's concept of model railroading was not everyone's cup of tea, but it really, looking back, there's probably a few people, myself included, who are only in the hobby because of, his influence, which is not a bad thing, And I'd like to think that I'm probably more of a prototype modeler these days, but you always got to remember where you came from, I think, Ray.
Yeah, for sure. And, starting in the school library, looking at Malcolm Furlow's work and then getting the opportunity to bring him into your club and meet him in person, that must have been a big fan moment for you.
Yeah, I think, I can't remember. I was maybe 15 or so. And I remember sort of, you get stopped in your tracks when you meet someone famous. And to me, he was famous. And I don't even remember what I said or if I ever said anything. I think I got him to sign a copy of one of those old model railroads, when it was a good thick magazine.
Yeah.
It was one of the ones where he'd done the series on the San Juan Central, which, I still have that book today. And there's techniques in there that might be outdated, but they were workable for me at the time. And as a result, my first layout I probably built from start to finish was, heavily influenced by Malcolm Furlow, and I squeezed too much into a too small area, but I was able to take it to train shows, and it was one of those things that I reckon, Ray, if you give anyone a bit of advice starting in the hobby and you'd like to sort of do what you say and say what you do, is that I would recommend to anyone, do the whole lot, lay your track, do your scenery, paint and weather your locos and rolling stock, make it all look right, because that building that layout taught me every aspect of the hobby. I didn't get it all right, but I experienced. Then from then you've got to do it to learn what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, they're called learning layouts, right? I mean, the opportunity, and your first one, obviously for you certainly wasn't your last, and it doesn't have to be your last, but it can certainly be a great platform to learn the hobby from.
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally correct. And I think even today I've got a huge project going on. It's probably going to be a 15-year project down in the shed. I'm 4 years into it, and if I'm around long enough, this won't be my last layout either, because obviously there'll be an inevitable downsize. But I'm trying to put mistakes and stuff that I've learned over the last 25, 30 years and not make those mistakes again. I've managed to find a whole new bunch of mistakes to make anyway, but yeah, not make the same ones, and just learn a little bit from each part of the hobby you sort of do.
So you mentioned as a young child and into your teenage years and building your layout, and you got influenced by Tyco. Where do you start to get the influence for narrow gauge? Because I think that was kind of one of your next steps, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, it was. Like I said, Ray, it all went back to those. And I think it was, probably correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was mid to late 70s where Malcolm Furlow was doing those articles in Model Railroader. It was a whole series, and he put it together. And from everything I've read about it, some of those layouts didn't operate at all well. They weren't built for operation. They were built for scenery and photo opportunities and to what would you say, to demonstrate those, especially that vertical scenery. That's what kind of hooked me in. So that's probably where, Ray. And back in those days, there wasn't a lot. I mean, there wasn't a lot of HUN3, so it probably forced me to scratch build. It forced me to build some kits that were essentially a box of strip wood. I built a couple of the old Roundhouse HUN3 MDC locos, which were really coarse by today's standards. But at the same time, I think I put a couple of re-gearing kits in them that Northwest Shortline did. So, I don't know why I chose one of the least accessible scales of the hobby, but by doing that, I also taught myself a lot. And I mean, there were rail line box cars that you had to drill all the grab irons. And I'm thinking, hang on, this off the shelf, in standard gauge, you can kind of get all those molded grabs then. So it took me a while to learn how to do that and make it look good. I think I've still got my first rail line box car I built, and not one of those grab irons is parallel to the next, but you sort of, I think it's important to keep that old stuff. So yeah, HUN3 was probably my entry into the hobby. Recent as about 18 months ago, I just built a small layout to take to train shows. It's been exhibited once here, and that was as a result because I had a lot of structures from a long, long while ago that were still sitting in boxes. I thought, I'll pull all this together and see how it all works. And yeah, a couple of those structures that I was going to scrap ended up becoming foreground. So I tend not to throw anything away, Ralph. I've put some time and effort into it, and everything's salvageable.
Yeah, and I think we've learned that as well with Lance Menheim talking about that when he changes layouts. It doesn't mean that you're starting from scratch. You can take what you've started with and move it along. And it sounds like you've been able to do that. But I wonder about this stuff from the beginning. And you're in New South Wales, Australia. How's the availability for this stuff? I mean, I know there's challenges. I mean, we talked to our executive producer, Paul Cassar, and he talks about the expense and challenge of having availability. But then you pick I don't know if I want to call it obscure, but it certainly isn't the most popular on the shelf scale to build. And this is in the, between 1996 and 1999. It must have been quite challenging to get your hands on this stuff.
Yeah, it was, Ray. No doubt at all. I do remember back in those days, this is pre-internet, before you could actually do it. And I used to have to get up early, and I had a contact at Caboose Hobbies in Denver at the time. And I'd ring him and we'd talk, and I'd say, right, here's my order. And I'd talk really fast. And then on a separate phone call, I'd ring him through my credit card number, and then we'd follow it up with a couple of handwritten letters just to confirm. And those letters would take, best part of 10 days to arrive from Australia over to Denver, and then his reply. So it wasn't easy. And looking back, and I had a guy in Florida who used to do some custom dry transfers and decals for me, and we would correspond by snail mail, and that's what we knew back then. And in some ways, I think it also made me really focus on what I wanted, and I had to get it right because there was not much margin for error. These days, if you order something online and you get it wrong or it's not what you expected, it's pretty much simply, oh well, I'll jump back on and add that to my next order and flick them an email. So that sort of back then, I really focused on getting what I needed exactly right. But yeah, you are correct. It was a fairly obscure scale, but you got to remember at the end of the day, HO is the most popular scale. So there's a lot of parts and a lot of details and a lot of scenery and obviously figures and structures that cross over to not just narrow gauge but standard gauge layouts as well, depending on the era. So yeah, I looking back, it was kind of a challenge, and I don't know if I intentionally went to follow the hardest road possible, but it's where you end up, not where you start, mate.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I'm thinking about that pre-internet challenge of getting your hands on stuff to work on. And it certainly is not the instant gratification that we enjoy today. And I'm also thinking maybe that helped in a way of keeping you on track and away from just buying stuff and forced you to be more creative.
Oh yeah, it did. Once you've made that commitment to move forward with something like that, yeah, it was. I was very focused, and there was a lot of stuff. I was like, oh, look at that, oh, look at that. But I tried to keep within those guardrails, as we say, and it worked. I had a lot of fun building that layout. It was a culmination of a whole bunch of stuff, and I took it to a bunch of trade shows. It was only 1 meter, so that's just over 3 foot by 2 meters long. So it was very compact. And anyway, it taught me a lot, of stuff. And I looked at some of those structures 2 years ago. I thought, who built this? And it's like, oh, that's right, I did. So, you can't be too critical of stuff back then, but there's techniques and materials change over time.
I'm going to ask you to pronounce this layout name that you built between 1996 and 1999.
Oh, yeah, the Charma, Tiago, and Southern. So how I came up with that, as most people know, Charma, New Mexico is a bit of a hot spot for narrow gauge. The Cumbers and Toltec runs out of there. So at the time, I think it was PBL had done that really nice. I think it was then. There was a couple of prototype articles in Road Model Craftsman and Narrow Gauge Gazette on Charma. So I sort of took that name because straight away it sounded narrow gauge. And then the time Jim Findlay had a layout. His layout was called the Tioga Pass, and I thought I'll put those two together and change it from Tioga to Tiago. And also, I made mention of those dry transfers and decals. Well, I was using a lot of the Colorado and Southern decal sets and CDS dry transfers to do my rolling stock. So the CNS block type lettering, and that came in handy. So that's how I ended up with that. But yeah, Charma Tiago is how you'd pronounce it.
Well, I'm going to let you say it, and I won't goof it up. You do have a link here for a YouTube video on that. We'll share it in our show notes around the layout.com/165.
Sure. No worries, Ray. Yeah.
So we get past 1999 and it's time for another change. Talk about that one that you start in the year 2000.
Yeah. Well, probably was maybe a year or so before that. We had a convention out here, an NRA convention, probably one of the first ones I went to. I think it was about 97, 98. Dave Frere and Bob Hayden came out, and they were pretty impressed with a lot of the modelling that the guys down under were doing. And I think they were overheard to say, what have they got us here for? What are they, they're doing all right here. But anyway, they come out, and then I met a modeller who had a really good reputation in the hobby, and he came over to my place one day, and his name was Jeff Knott, and he and I ended up becoming really good friends. And he came over, and at the time I was renting a house with two mates of mine, and I'd built my layout, and it pretty much was finished, and I think I'd exhibit it once or twice. And Jeff came over, and he just kind of sat there for an hour, and I thought, man, this guy, he's a really good modeler. I'd seen his stuff had been on the cover of the Great Model Railroads and Continental Modeler. And I said, but he doesn't say much. And I'm thinking, I hope he sort of, and he just turns to me and said, Steve, me and you are going to get on really well. I was like, oh, okay, that's a relief. So there's nothing to worry about. He was a lovely person, really good artist. He'd build layouts, and seriously, Ray, he wouldn't care less if there was trains on them or not. He was more into the whole scenery aspect of things. And then he said one night, he said, look, do you want to build it, and I'd seen his HO Lee Creek Lumber Company, and it was spectacular. You got to look it up. There are a couple of YouTubes out there, videos of it, and also it's been in a few magazines. And he only lived probably 5 or 10 minutes from where I was at the time. He proposed. He said, "Oh, do you want to do something in O scale, O narrow gauge?" And this was before the whole ON30 kind of revolution. So Jeff would come around and he'd draft up a couple of sections. It was going to be Pacific Northwest logging in ON3, and which basically meant we're going to have to scratch build pretty much everything for it. And progressively, as he and I would catch up, it started as 3 sections, and then it went to 4, then it went to 5, then it went to some stuff in front, and it kind of expanded as the design went on. And 2 other friends of ours said, "Oh, look, we'd like to be part of that." So Jeff and I built 4 out of the 6 sections, and the other 2 guys contributed with their 2. The Red Stag Lumber Company, it was called. Yeah, and we had a lot of fun with that. Jeff, he enjoyed doing rock work using real rock shale, and that looked spectacular, but geez, it weighed a lot. So we only probably exhibited that layout for maybe 2.5 years, did an NMRA convention and a couple of train shows around Sydney. We had to hire a 7-ton Pantech truck to move it. And I think also the weight of it contributed to its earlier demise and should have happened. One of those sections is still at Ray Walter's place. He's worked that into a home layout in some degree. So that still exists. We would all read the Narrow Gauge Gazette. We ended up being featured in 4 issues of that. Bob Brown was really happy to feature. So it was a good thing to have, and it was good to work with 3 other people. And that teaches you a lot that, if you're going to work as a cooperative, you've got to be willing to compromise and accept constructive criticism. And Jeff had a very subtle way that he'd come up and he'd put his arm on your shoulder and say, "So, do you think this really works?" And you would say, "Okay, let's rethink this." So, but no, it was. I mean, I was really honoured to be part of it, and it was a spectacular layout. And it was the first time we showed it, I think, was 99 or 2000. And on the Saturday at the show, there was a lot of people interested in it. And then I got home that night and I rang Jeff. I said, "Have you got lots of emails?" And this was like before any Yahoo groups. And we had a couple of hundred emails. So people had emailed us about, photos that somebody's put onto a chat group or something. And it just, it was pretty well known around the world in a short space of time. But again, right, we used a lot of natural materials. Some of them worked, others didn't. We'd use some fresh moss that we'd go in the bush and get, but it was very hard to preserve, so it dried and crumbled. But we hand laid all the track. It was probably that more obscure scale that forced you out of your comfort zone.
What were some of the bigger lessons that you learned from Jeff as you worked with him?
I think the probably the best one. And because I was 20 years younger than him, and so when someone like Jeff sort of takes you under his wing and we were good friends, he and Jill, his wife, and myself and Susan, we would catch up socially outside of the hobby. He was a really nice person and a very gentle, very softly spoken guy. But I'd bring something along that we built was going to go on the layout, and he'd go, "That's," he'd pay compliments where it was, and he'd be able to suggest something that we could improve it on, or I could improve on it without being demeaning. It was very, and he never had a bad word to say about anyone. And I'd sort of try and roll with that going forward in the hobby and outside just in everyday life. But he really, and I think anyone who knows him would agree. And there's still a lot of friends of his that we're all mates together as well. He really just focused on the artistic side of the hobby. When Jeff passed away, there was a group of us who Jill asked, could we help her deal with some of his models, and we would get under there, and I'm looking at his wiring and thinking, this really was designed to fail. So he wasn't that interested in running trains, right? It was a diorama, and I don't think he cared if it was going to be static or not, but he really focused on that artistic side, and that's probably why he and I got on, I reckon.
Yeah, that's one of the more amazing parts of the hobby is that you don't have to focus on everything. If you want, you can really drill it on one thing. And the other thing I want to mention, and it's a great lesson for those that get the opportunity to mentor, that leading by asking questions like he did to you. Like he walked you down the path. He didn't shove you in the back, and he certainly didn't get in front of you and trip you up either. He kind of guided you down the path with asking you some questions and kind of letting you walk kind of ahead of him. That's such a great way to mentor. And I'm sure that kept you encouraged, kept that flywheel turning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good life lesson too, I reckon, right? Like, you know, I'd like to think that some of his good traits I've sort of tried to carry on, you know, and as well, like, you know, at the moment it's a bit off topic, but I'm building a small switching layout for a family friend of ours, and he'll be 11 years old next year. So he had a 4x8 looper track and was getting frustrated, and his mum was asking me, could we? So, you know, I think there's that opportunity for people as they get further in the hobby and have had a bit of experience. And, you know, it's not all good experience. I mean, good experience comes from bad experience. So I'm sort of trying to, you know, pay that forward a bit. And we've got some models together for him, and I'll build, it's coming together. So, yeah, I kind of think back to what are we now, 2020? So 27 years ago where Jeff sort of did similar to me, you know, and he let me find my own way. But his way of giving feedback was never demeaning.
Well, you're certainly a master model railroader now, number 341, and congratulations on that. But I'm sure if we went and looked at your birth certificate, it doesn't have a comma MMR at the end of your name, does it?
No, it doesn't. And to be honest, right at the time, I was a bit overawed by all that, because there was when I first joined the NMRA, you know, I was sort of long-haired, skateboard riding, listen to loud music, and a lot of guys kind of took a while to warm up to me, and I was like, you shouldn't judge people on there. But, you know, when I started bringing along some of my modelling, and then they'd start asking me how I did it, and I said, well, I'm reading the same books as you guys, you know, like there's no difference. And then at the time, the AP chairman or manager over here in Div 7, he was a good friend of mine, Michael. He was one of the guys I worked with on the Red Stag, and he said, you do know, Steve, you've probably got enough to do 5 or 6 of your APs. And I was like, yeah, but geez, Michael, it seems like a lot of paperwork. And look, at the time, Ray, it actually was paperwork because I didn't have access to a PC. You know, couldn't edit a PDF and save it. It was all pre-printed NMRA forms. You'd fill them out by hand, and they'd go into a clipboard or a binder. So, but it was a lot of fun. I'm glad I did. That's 24 years ago now, and I don't look at that as, oh yeah, I've got that now, I'm done. I look at that more of like so, you know, if you go to university and you study, or we have TAFE and we learn skills, it's just one of those things along the way that you've learned. It taught me a lot. I managed to get my MMR fairly organically, so I'd done a lot of the modelling previous to that. I just had to sit down and document it. So it was a really big honour, and the guys, the local Div 7 guys, made a big deal. I remember them asking me, oh, you know, I need you and your wife and to come along to this meeting. I'm thinking, why? And they hadn't told me that I'd done all 7, you know, that I qualified. And yeah, they made it. It was just a really it was pretty humbling, but also I just look at it as one of those steps along the way where, you know, it's something I've done, and I'd like to think that the modelling I did back 27 years ago is hopefully improved by now. I'm in a bit of trouble if it hasn't. So, yeah, I'd like to think that that's gotten better, and I'm sure it has. And like I said, I try to just stay open and open-minded to new techniques, and trying not necessarily new, but ones that I hadn't tried before. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, but you're not going to know until you try it.
No, the comparison that you started to make there about graduating from a university and you get your degree, but that doesn't mean you stop learning, and nor does it when you get your master model railroader and you drive that landmark into the ground, you say you've done it, and then you continue down the path of learning. And for you, that path of learning looks to be yet another layout. You put the Red Stag to rest, and then you're off to build yet another layout. Talk about that one.
Yeah, it was kind of a sad day when we all agreed. We took all the structures and all the details and that off the Red Stag, but really the weight of it was its undoing. And I think I kept a photo of when I put my last module, the bare bones of it, into the dumpster. And at the time where we were living, I'd built a sort of a small layout room, and I was continuing. I'd built a scratch built a heap of structures. The Jeff had built a magnificent sawmill for the Red Stag, mine was of a different design and not as large, but it was planned to go into a a home layout. And I had a lot of scratch built structures that I'd spent months and months. They were a diorama in themselves. I got maybe 25, 30% of the way. It was all, I hand laid all the track, and then we had life situations outside the hobby. We had to sell that house and move, which it was a shame, but it's just all part of it. I've listened to guys on your podcast, Ray, and other things where stuff happens outside the hobby that you roll with it, and doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to stop modelling. You just find a different way, and that was good. I managed to keep a lot of those structures. The thing was, though, we'd sort of got a little bit of prominence in the hobby, and I was contacted by Dave Revelia over at the I don't think it's I think he closed the centre down. It was the Suncoast Centre for Fine Modelling, and he rang me and said, look, he said, Stephen, it just happened at the time we were moving house, and he said, I'd really like to have your sawmill as part of our display. Would you be interested in getting it here to Florida? I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know about getting it through customs and all of that, but because there was a lot of natural materials on it. But he said, no, he organised the shipping container. There was another layout that a couple of guys down in Victoria had built, Dan Pickard and John Hunter, and they it was a model of the Dolly Varden, and Dave had expressed them an interest, so it sort of started from there. So I had to pack my sawmill up. We agreed and negotiated on a exchange fee, I guess you call it. And yeah, it went down to Victoria by courier, and then went into a shipping container with the Dolly Varden layout, and went across to Florida where it was in display. So I think that's it was like I said, I don't think that. I think Dave closed that place down just around COVID. I'm not sure of the exact time frame, but yeah, it went down. I'm not even sure where that sawmill is now, but it was one of those. So that was, I was pretty proud to have somebody like Dave contact me and express an interest in something I built, from scratch. So
yeah, so I was thinking, I mean, it must be humbling, because not only, for somebody to want something you've built, but then to have to put all that effort into getting it, to move it, halfway around the globe to get it, and they want to do it that badly that they get it done. That's got to be an honor for you.
Yeah, logistically, my first reaction with him said, Dave, that'd be lovely, but I don't see how that can happen. But he I think he at the time, or he still does, owned a shipping company. So logistically, because he actually arranged for Jeff and the other guys post Red Stag had built the Muskrat Ramble, which was a Louisiana swamp layout in ON30. And I think it's actually on display at the NMRA Museum at Sacramento. And Dave had arranged for them to get that over to the Narrow Gauge Convention in Hickory, and then it was put into storage for some time, and Charlie Getz sorted that to go to the museum. So, yeah, it was not a big deal for Dave to make all that happen. And it was, and it was interesting to see. It wasn't easy, but I made sure it got there in the same condition that I'd built it.
So some life changes, and you change where you live. And in 2006, it looks like you go small with a micro layout. Tell us a little bit about this one.
Well, that was kind of out of necessity, Ray. Like I said, we had to downsize for reasons, just family reasons and that. Anyway, I thought, there was the Barkman had just released a lot of their ON30 stuff. I thought, this is pretty cool. And I built a couple of kits, and I thought, it's just the Carl Laurent, you may have heard of him. There's a whole subculture of micro layout builders, and I thought, I don't have much space at the moment, but it's not going to stop me from doing some modelling. So I built that in a fairly compact area, and it was really good. The best part of that, taking that along to exhibitions, apart from being able to carry it in and plug it in and turn the trains on, was that so many people come up to me and said, I always thought I had to have a big 4x8 space or a garage or something to have a running layout. And I said, no, it's not the case. I said, this is 2 by 2.5 foot. I said, you can, and they said, yeah, thanks. It'll make me rethink everything. And that's kind of what our house move forced me a bit of a rethink, but again, learned a few more techniques and took that along. That actually, I think, in another subsequent house move, I think there was a model company up in Brisbane in Queensland that they knew me and they said, "Oh, if you ever move or you ever get tired of that little layout, it'd be perfect for our shop." So anyway, that's where that ended up, Ray.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've got layouts going north, you got layouts going across the water, you got a little bit of your touch going all over the place, and people
Yeah, I
getting
decided to go
enjoy it.
global.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, that's excellent. So
Yeah.
with this micro layout, I mean, now you can really drill in because you have something completely, that's a lot smaller. Talk about that and the ability to really focus on super detailing.
Well, yeah, that's the key, isn't it? You don't need a big space, and we've heard that concept, discussed many times on your podcast. I think there's that producer of yours. He's sort of into shelf layouts and stuff, and says you don't need a big space. Yeah. So, and he's spot on. It's absolutely correct. And what that does, it helps you focus your energy into scenes. Look at a 6x6 inch square bit of scenery at a time, and then sort of. And once again, I always try to use those as an experiment for a new technique. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't turn out well, but if it does, you think, oh, okay, there's something I could use somewhere in the future.
So 2006, you're building the micro layout, and it keeps your skills sharp, because in 2007, it looks like you had a pretty unique project in front of you.
Yeah, that was it was funny how that turned out, actually, Ray. I was sort of interested. I've always been, like I said earlier when we started, I've always been interested in Western US railroading. And I was approached by, it was actually when I'd taken this micro layout to a train show not far from where I lived. And a guy approached me, and he was from the other side of Sydney. And he said, "Oh, look, I've got no time, no skills, but I want to have this layout." He said, "Would you be interested in helping me?" I said, "Well, I work full time, and to for my detox downtime, I like to do modelling, so I'd prefer not to make it a job." But he said, "Look, how about if we did it?" We went backwards and forwards a few times, and he was into Canadian railroading, and I said, "Okay, look, I'll." So I actually took it on and I built it, and it took me maybe less than a year to build that. And I said, "Look, he wanted it for his home, and he had these dimensions," and I said, "That's fine." I said, "But part of this agreement, if we do build this, and obviously I was compensated for my time and any materials, I said that we should take this out to show the public before it, So he agreed to that. We built it. I think I took it to 3 or 4 exhibitions. It was it was, and it was when onboard DCC sound was becoming a thing, and that was something that I thought, wow, this is cool. We've got sound on board. We can lash up a consist, and they'll play nice together. So it was kind of the next step, as it were. But I think some of the decoders that were in those locos weren't great. They were the early MRCs with the, but anyway, at the time it was groundbreaking. So that layout was in existence for a couple of years, and then towards the end he rang me and said, "Oh, look, he'd had something in life change." He said, "Look, I'm really not. I don't think I can incorporate this at home." And I think he may have separated from his wife, and he said, "So look, I'm happy for you to sell it and get what you can for it to, compensate for your, obviously there was, you can't, it's very hard to put a price on your modelling time. I've heard Lance Minheim talk, and it's his business, and he's obviously got a really good business structure. But when it's your hobby, I've had people say, "Oh, I want you to paint or weather this, make it look like yours." And I said, "If I charge you 50 cents an hour, it'd still be several $100s, And that's you're not paying for the paint and that, you're paying for the 30 years of mistakes you've made previous." So and this guy, he was pretty good. He understood all that. He said, "Look, it was your skill and experience that got it to this point. I'm happy for you to." So I sold it. I think I sold it on eBay, actually. Yeah. And a guy from somewhere, he came, although I remember he turned up in a trailer way too small. I said, "Mate, what are you thinking here?" And so I ended up having to deliver 2 sections of it to him as well. But again, right, you put that down as a learning experience. It was a bit of fun. It was a lot of work, and I probably it taught me a lot about making layouts that are portable. I learned that with the Red Stag with Jeff and Michael and Ray. We used timber and we used rear rock. Well, that layout there, the Otter Canyon, the CP rail, was all extruded aluminium framing and XPF blue foam, which I've used on I've even used blue foam on my home lat for roadbed, but also anything that's portable, and it's strong, it's inert, it stays square, and it's very lightweight.
Yeah, very good. More lessons learned from past layouts and passed along. And then in 2012, now you've been talking about all these North American layouts, but in 2012 you do something completely foreign, which was really neat. Talk about what's it? Lomo. Is that what this is?
Yeah, it's a little village on the main island of Fiji. Fiji's Pacific island. It's quite a popular holiday destination for a lot of people, especially on the east coast of Australia. Susan and my wife and I, we actually just went back to Fiji a couple of weeks ago. Our first kid-free holiday in 20 years. But we'd been there. We'd had a couple of family holidays to there. It seemed, Ray, that we always ended up going there after a natural disaster. And the second time we'd visited, they'd had huge floods. So a lot of the infrastructure, roads and Fiji had a 2-foot gauge cane railway network, which is still in parts of the island, still in operation. And so I saw a lot of bridges and that were still standing. There were a lot of steel, simple girder type bridges. And when I got home, one of the guys who'd organised the narrow gauge conventions, which is a biannual, not biannual, every 2 years event, and said, "Oh, what are you bringing down to?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "I hadn't planned on anything." And so instead of just doing a diorama, I built this whole layout. It was good. It was a good little. You used the ON30 Barkman Plymouth Gath Mechanicals, heavily kit bashed. I had to raise the cab and and what I built was fairly representative of what I saw there. Scratch built my own best full stick cane cars, and ended up having to work out a way of making representative sugarcane. And anyway, in the end, by the time I'd finished it, I think I bought every straw millet broom that Bunnings, that's our big warehouse, had in stock, and I'd cut up the finer ends of that, airbrush them, and it gave a decent enough representation of cut cane and also the cane field. So again, a bit of a lesson learned. Unfortunately, the layout got damaged. I'd put it in storage at work. We didn't have the space at home, and where I was working, they had some renovations, and the builders didn't think that it was of any value, and they piled stuff on top. And I was like, oh, but anyway, I rescued a lot of my palm trees. Yeah, it was a bit of fun, and I built it in under 3 months anyway, Ray.
And what size was this layout?
To put it into imperial, so each section was about 4 foot long. There was 2 sections, so it'd be 8 foot long by about 2 foot deep, Ray. Pretty much a simple switching layout, one track. And then I had some aluminium right angle cassettes because the trains weren't that long. The only thing was I found I had to insulate the aluminium, because when you're grabbing both sides of a DCC cassette, you get a bit of a tingle in your fingers. So I'd run the trains off the end and like, what's that buzz? Oh, okay, yeah. So again, Ray, I just put that down to experience, and it was a bit of fun along the way.
So you built this relatively sizable layout in 3 months? You must have been like laser focused. I mean, did you do anything else, Steve? I mean, were you getting any of the household chores done, or were you pretty much in trouble and just drilled down on building this? Because that's a short period of time to get all of this done in some amazing scenery. And you're scratch building cars, you're customizing the locomotive, you're doing a lot of this stuff. You must not do you sleep at all, Steve?
Yeah, look, I had a lot more time and energy back then, Ray. But no, look, to break down your question one bit at a time, the cars that I did scratch build, I built a jig for because I knew I was going to need multiples. There was nothing available. So I'd learned from other modelers over the years, as soon as you're building more than one of something, it's worth your time putting into a jig. So that speed curve, that will speed up the overall production time. So I think I built maybe 10 or 11, 12 cars in a short time frame. It wasn't that big a deal, Ray. I know it sounds a bit offhand, but there was a lot of trees, a lot of scenery. It's a very lush. It's a tropical island, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and I'm kind of, I know how to build trees. What I learned was I could get some palm trees. They didn't look very good on eBay, but then with a bit of extra airbrushing and painting and detailing the trunks and the husks and all that, they turned out to quite a decent representation of a palm tree. So yeah, I did work fast on it. It's like anything, Ray. You give somebody a deadline, and they've got a fixed target they can hit. if I sort of had another year to build it, I probably would have taken another year. So that's kind of an unrealistic deadline was set. I set it, but also managed to get it done, and it was good. Yeah, I was working pretty hard on it, to be honest.
Oh yeah, it sounds like you were very task orientated getting this done, and I'm just amazed. And again, the images that I'm looking at, we'll get some of these shared on our website again, aroundthelayout.com/165. So that takes care of 2012, 2013, and then it's back to the 1/160th scale for you. Talk about going back to N.
Well, as I mentioned, we had to downsize the houses, which was, for a few years, you do what you have to do, and we've had some challenges outside that we've had to face, and we've done that pretty well. So yeah, I still had some of my really, really early, and God, it was awful, NSCAR, but there was a couple of real jewels in that, and a couple of them were the early Kato SD and F unit locos that I'd had for sitting in boxes for quite a while. And I thought, you know what? You look at what's around you. I'm a little bit stuck for space. I could probably do this. So I'd always had an interest in the Rio Grande, still do today. But and so I thought, well, and I wanted to learn. I'd never built any desert scenery before, and there used to be a layout, an NSCAR layout that was exhibited over our way for a while. That was called Gold River Canyon or Lost River Canyon, and it was amazing. It was Arizona, Utah desert, long trains winding through the canyons, and they actually had a couple of scenes where, if you looked at it, all you could see was fascia that went up above your eye level, but they had mirrors above it, like blind spot mirrors, that you could look into them and down into the canyon. It was a real groundbreaking layout.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so cool. And I still bump into one of the guys who built that. And then he came along and he said, "Oh, this is." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Thanks, you guys." It was based on that. So I'm trying to represent the Utah desert, which ironically I'm actually building in HO on my home layout now. So it's very, desert scenery is not as simple as people think. It's very exposed. It's very, you can't hide your mistakes with a couple of trees. You know what I mean? So every part of the scenery is going to be scrutinized. So I taught myself a technique to build the mesas, and like I said, that vertical scenery dominating the trains. I think it really for anything, it if not for anything else, it dominates the trains. I think quite well. A lot of end scale modelers may think, oh well, I can cram more track in. Well, I sort of go the opposite. I sort of would prefer the scenery to dominate the trains. I got no problem at all, having a 3 foot deep scene with a single track running through it. So that's, and we all got our different concepts that we work by. That's kind of one of mine.
Yeah, and especially the vertical scenery and the images I'm looking at of this. And again, I'll share these on our website, aroundthelayout.com/165. And it is that the mountains just reach so high above the trains, and it gives you that really amazing perspective.
Yeah, I think it does. The only thing I regret, Ray, is I didn't take enough photos. I'm pretty good at building stuff. I'm not that good at recording and cataloging it. But yeah, I wish I'd taken some better photos, because a couple of those were from where I had it set up in our garage at home, and then I only exhibited it once. One of the things I did learn, and I tried it. I had the lighting was external to the layout, and since then I prefer to have a roof over it and control the lighting and the dust. Yeah, with that scenery dominating trains, I think that worked pretty well. And again, I had to learn a couple of new techniques that I sort of still use today.
So I see a little bit of a time gap between 2015 and 2019. You did a little. Did you sit on the sidelines, or were you just kind of waiting on a project there?
No, look, Ray. Yeah, sadly, Jeff passed away 2013, and I kind of took a step back and thought, you ask yourself. I had to do it. I did his eulogy at his funeral, and it was just one of those times where you kind of think, okay, what do I want to do? Do I really want to? And it was silly, really. I should have just kept doing it. And it took me a little while to work out that. Figured if he was around, he'd say, Steve, do what you love doing. Just get back into it and get off your butt and stop making excuses. And he was spot on. He would have been spot on if he'd said that. So yeah, it was just, I think too, at the time we were yeah, we had some stuff going on in life that we were dealing with, and so that generally comes first. But like you've said, the hobby's always there for you. You can come back to it. It
Yeah.
ebbs and flows,
Yeah.
and it's a really good. I call it detox, but it's more downtime. It's a good break from the pressures of life. So yeah, and it took me a little while, a couple of years to kind of think. And I was doing some loco detailing, weathering, some of the locos I've even got today. Yeah, so I probably just wasn't. I didn't have a focus. You know what I mean? Like it's what do they say? It's hard to hit a fuzzy target. So I didn't have a focus. I didn't have room to commit to a home layout. I just built a couple of exhibition layouts. At the time as well, I made the decision to move out of Sydney. It was a decision for both our boys, and we live about an hour and a half south Sydney in a really nice part of the world. And it was a good decision. But it was a big decision at the time. So yeah, we had all that. When you have all that stuff going on, it kind of like I said, I didn't have that focus at the time, and that's cool. I was still sort of dipped my toe in the water and kept stuff going. But yeah, it's just one of those things. And like you said, you can pick it up anytime you want.
Yeah, I think we've all had that moment where we've gone through seasons in our life, and we all have those seasons, and we never know how long that season's going to last, but it is a season, and it will pass, and it is a beautiful thing that the hobby will wait for you. How did you get your flywheel turning again to start working on yet another layout in 2019? What was the real thing that kind of kicked you right in gear and got you going, Steve?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'd been dabbling with that GN15 for quite a while. I'd built a couple of locos, and I think it was around the time of when I got the ON30 Barkman gas mechanical Plymouths, and I thought, you know what, and then there's a bit of a subculture there, like I said, of the GN15 guys. It's sort of a bit funky, and it's like the 135th scale guys. They're a bit out there as well. So I'd started on that, and then after we'd moved down to Southern Highlands. I continued with it, and it was coming together. And I had a design. It was a switchback design, and it was a fairly more of a linear design layout. And anyway, I was getting along with it, and then as it happened, I had to go in for total knee replacement surgery. My left knee was shot from 35 years of football and baseball and tree climbing. So I thought, and my surgeon said, "Oh, you're going to be out of action for 3 to 4 months." And I said, "Oh, cool. I'm going to get some modelling done."
Yeah, it's probably not the reaction that he gets when people are saying, "Yeah, you're going to be laid up for a while." And you got a guy going, "Yeah, all right, that's great." Yeah.
Yeah, he looked at me strangely. He goes, "You're weird." I said, "Well, I'm looking at the positives."
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, there was a deadline. It was the last Australian narrow gauge convention before COVID hit. It was basically the Easter of 2019. Literally weeks before COVID was becoming this kind of thing that we'd hear about in China at the time. What I had underestimated though, Ray, was the pain relief and that I was on whilst I was doing my rehab for my knee replacement surgery. So I'd go and stand in the layout and stuff was moving and I couldn't focus on it. So I really had to change the design to meet the deadline. I got it built in time and took it up to the Central Coast, and it's a bit of fun. That layout, actually, I took it to a convention in northern New South Wales back in November, and one of the Div 1 guys in the NMRA up in Queensland, he said, this would really... So he really took a shine to it, and I said, yeah, Paul. So it's actually now residing in Queensland layout. But again, it was a lot of fun. It was built on total fantasy freelance, like real model rotors. I mean, we're all model rotor some way. They kind of go, "Oh, what's this represent?" And I said, "Well, it's all in my mind, but it's a bit of fun." Paul up in Queensland, he's now the owner of it. He's taken it to a couple of train shows in Queensland, so it's had an audience that it wouldn't have seen otherwise, which is cool. But yeah, that was a focus for a couple of years, Ray, and it's probably what kind of got me modelling. I in the interim, I scratch built a depot, Pacific Electric depot, Fullerton, California, which I visited back in 2016 when one of the last trips was US. I had a couple of those little desktop projects going which, it was all I had space and time and energy for, and I just kept my toe in the hobby.
Amazing. And I'll tell you, these photos, and again, if you haven't caught it already, we're going to be sharing them on our website, aroundthelayout.com/165. They are to be seen. And I'm looking at one that looks like a workshop, that you shared, and just the detail you put in this thing is just outstanding. I mean, incredible. I guess you got to sign up for knee replacements to get your stuff done and get some amazing detail in. This is incredible stuff, Steve.
It's Ray. It's not what I'd recommend. Yeah, don't go doing that. Look, I think larger scales. It taught me something. Larger scales has a huge upside to it, that you get to do all that detail. Larger scales also have a huge downside to it, that you have to do all that detail. You know what I mean? Like it's heavily scrutinized. Like, that's only a small scene, and there was some really cool close-up miniatures, and there's in that scene that you're looking at there, Ray, with the workshop, there are details from O scale, HO scale, G scale, and a couple of 1/35th military things. Now, they all look like they belong together. That's just how I painted and weathered them and arranged them. Doesn't mean that you have to go and you can only use 1/24th scale details in a scene. I've just always worked on the thing with my modelling, Ray. It's what looks right, not necessarily what is right, So if something looks right, and I do that to this day, I try not to let things hang up on me and go, oh, yeah, should I do it? No, just do it. If it looks right, it's right. So yeah, that scene, that little workshop, there's probably a couple of months in that, to be honest. Given that it's large scale, I had to solder the frame together. I had to make it really. There's no little styrene sort of structures. I had to really make it robust enough that it would stand up to transporting, and also just the overall size of it. But again, I learn a bit from it. Would I do something in that larger scale again? I don't think so. It's very intense, and it takes, but it was a lot of fun, and it gave me appreciation of the stuff, that larger end of the modeling spectrum, I guess.
Do you find with larger scale that it's a little bit harder to kind of hide a mistake, where like when you were back a few years prior with N scale, if you had something that was slightly off, maybe it wouldn't be noticed?
Yeah, you're spot on. It's lends itself to be heavily scrutinized. Even the figures, to paint a G scale figure, I reckon you're looking about a week and a half to do a good job. And that's not just doing the clothing colors. I read a lot of the military modeling magazines and look at a lot of those videos, and those guys, I mean, yes, they're static models, but geez, they do a great job. But one thing I've learned with the larger scale, for example, you don't just paint a pair of denim pants on a guy. You'll put down the base coat. You'll do the shadowing. You'll do the highlights. You've got to get that contrast and definition, because otherwise it's scrutinized. Whereas in HO, I generally would just do a bit of dry brushing over the final paint job.
So in 2023, we got yet another thing, and what's old is new again, with a name that I still can't say.
I'll help you out again. Charma Tiago. Just
awesome.
Yeah. Well,
it's and Southwestern, so a little bit of a change.
Yeah.
Talk about this HON3 layout that you built.
Well, in all honesty, Ray, it's a bit of an overlap of time frame there. So I had started my home layout in 2021. That's where we live now, and purpose-built shed and all that. Probably get to that a bit later. But anyway, I'd already started that. And I had a bit of one of the exhibition guys who put on a really big train show here, which since COVID has kind of grown to a massive model railroad exhibition. It's up in the western part of Sydney, and they hire the Rose Hill Racecourse. It's a huge function centre, all carpeted, climate controlled, cafes and everything. So it's like the ideal venue. And one of the organisers, who I've known for quite a long while, he said, "Hey, when you're going to build something, bring along." And I'm like, I've got a pretty big commitment in my home layout here. I've just built a shed, and it's a huge investment in time and space and obviously money. And he said, "Well, have a think about it." So I thought it over, and I thought, no, I really don't have time to do this. But I did anyway. So I said, all right. I said I'll try and get something there for that. So that gave me about 9 months from start to finish. But as I said, Ray, a lot of those structures, nearly all of those structures that are on that layout, and Will James's YouTube video does show it, in more detail. Like I said, I'm pretty hopeless with documenting stuff I've built. I kind of build it and then I forget to take photos of it. A lot of those structures, I'd started them 25 years ago. One of them that was an old resin chooch kit. I looked at it, I thought, God, who built this? And underneath, yep, sure enough, it was me. But I changed it, I repainted it, detailed it, and was kind of a good sort of snapshot, because some of the details, the old white metal details that were like fine scale miniatures 25 years ago, which looked okay, I replaced them and upgraded them with 3D printed stuff from mini prints and various other sources. And there's a couple of good UK 3D print companies that do wonderful figures. And so just a matter of upgrading and repainting, touching things up. And I was like, wow, I'm happy with that now, So instead of starting from scratch, which I didn't realistically have time for because I had my commitment of my home layout. So yeah, that from start to finish, that layout's about 9 months. I'd done rock work before, obviously, but I did these ones differently. I built them as a separate unit so that I could stain and get the colouring and the textures and the highlights and shadows into the rock work separately, and then fitted them into the layout. So it was, again, something that I kind of knew I'd have to do and I want to do for my home layout. So again, 25 years on from my first H2N3 layout, I'm still learning stuff.
Yeah, and continuing to learn stuff. And we've hit that hour mark that really brings Around the Layout to a close. So we're going to have to bring you back, and we're going to dive deep into your Tennessee Pass and Utah division layout and learn a bit about that. And we're also going to talk about some of the site visits you've been able to do over the years as well, and your passion for it. So we'll get you back on Around the Layout very soon. We'll talk about all of that and much more. And who knows, maybe by then you'll be building at least 2 or 3 more layouts. We don't know, right, Steve? So
settle down, Ray.
Yeah. But until then, Steve, thank you so much for coming by and telling your story.
No worries, Ray. Thanks for having me. It's been good fun.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.